When Demet Özdemir finally decided to speak about that unforgettable moment, her words carried the weight of years of silence, emotions, and hidden pain. She began softly, almost hesitantly, but with every sentence her voice grew stronger, like a woman who had been holding back for too long and now, at last, had no choice but to let it out. "When he smiled at me," she said, "I felt the pain behind it." And with that single line, she opened the door to a story that millions of fans had only guessed about, a story that had always remained in the shadows. It was never just a smile. For the public, for the cameras, and for the endless flash of paparazzi lights, a smile is often nothing more than a performance, a gesture to calm rumors, to give hope, or to cover scars that run far deeper than anyone can imagine. But for Demet, that smile was something else entirely. It was the face of a man she had loved, a man she had shared countless memories with, a man she thought she knew inside and out. Yet that day, when his lips curved into what seemed like a genuine smile, she felt something that no one else did, the hidden pain. Can Yaman, with his strong presence and magnetic charisma, had always been someone who could command attention without even trying. His fans adored him, the media followed him everywhere, and every gesture he made became a headline. But Demet, she had seen the other side. She had seen the tiredness in his eyes after long nights of shooting, the vulnerability in his voice when he spoke of dreams he wasn't sure he could achieve, the moments of silence when words weren't enough. That smile was never just a smile, it was a mask, a fragile wall built to protect emotions that were far too raw to be shown in public. "When he looked at me that day," Demet recalled, "I knew he was hurting. I could see it in his eyes, even though he didn't want me to." It was the kind of statement that instantly made fans hold their breath. Because for years, speculation about their relationship had filled magazines, blogs, and social media feeds. Some believed they had truly been in love, others thought it was all a carefully staged narrative for their hit series. But moments like this, Demet's confession, reminded everyone that behind the glittering facade of celebrity life, there were two real people struggling with real emotions. That smile became a symbol, a memory that haunted Demet, not because it was fake, but because it was real in its sadness. To the outside world, it looked like charm. To her, it was a goodbye, a silent cry, or perhaps even a final attempt to say, "I'm okay," when deep down, he wasn't. And for Demet, that contradiction burned into her heart, making it impossible to forget. As she opened up about it, her fans could almost picture the scene, a crowded room, cameras flashing, Ken smiling like the star everyone adored. And Demet, standing there, the only one who truly understood what lay behind that expression. She wasn't just remembering a smile, she was reliving a heartbreak. For Demet, that smile was not an isolated memory, it was connected to 1,000 unspoken words, 1,000 moments when their eyes met and neither dared to admit what they were truly feeling. She explained how everything between them had always been more complicated than the fans could ever imagine. "People saw us laughing, joking, sharing scenes full of passion," she said, "but they didn't see the nights when silence was heavier than words, when distance was louder than closeness." The truth was that being part of a story that millions loved came with an unbearable weight. Every smile, every glance, every accidental touch on screen was dissected by fans and transformed into theories. The world wanted to believe in the fairy tale, but the fairy tale had its cracks. And Demet was one of the few who saw those cracks forming in Can, behind that dazzling smile. She remembered one particular evening, after a long day of shooting, when he had walked into the dressing room with that same smile. To anyone else, it would have seemed charming, confident, exactly what one would expect from a man adored by millions. But Demet noticed how his shoulders slumped as soon as he thought no one was watching, how his hands trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette. She sat quietly, observing, wanting to ask what was wrong but not knowing how to break the silence. It was in moments like that when she realized that the smile wasn't just for the cameras, it had become his shield, his only way of surviving the immense pressure. Fans often forget that behind fame lies loneliness. Ken was loved by the world, but at times, Demet could see that he felt utterly alone. That smile, that shield, was a way to keep the world at a distance, to hide the exhaustion of always being strong, always being perfect. And though she admired his strength, she also feared it, because it meant he rarely let anyone, even her, step close enough to share the burden. When he smiled at me, I felt the pain behind it because I knew him, Demet confessed, her voice trembling. I had seen the man behind the fame. I knew the moments when he doubted himself, when he questioned if all of this was worth it. And I could see, in that instant, that he was hurting, but he didn't want to show it. Her words painted a picture not of a glamorous love story, but of two people trapped in a reality that was bigger than themselves. They cared for each other, perhaps even loved each other more deeply than anyone will ever know, but they also carried wounds that couldn't heal in the spotlight. Every public smile hid a private tear, every loud laugh covered a silent cry. And for Demet, that was the most painful part of all. Because while the world believed in the magic of their chemistry, she was left holding the truth: the man she loved was smiling not out of joy, but out of necessity. It broke her heart every time she realized that what others saw as happiness was, in reality, pain disguised as charm. That single smile haunted her because it wasn't a lie, it was a confession without words. It was his way of saying, "I can't let them see me break." And she, standing there, was the only one who understood. That's why, after all these years, she still remembered it so vividly. It wasn't just a smile, it was a moment that told her everything she needed to know, but wished she didn't. What made that smile unforgettable for Demet wasn't only the gesture itself, but the silence that followed. Sometimes it isn't words that cut the deepest, it's the absence of them. For her, the smile wasn't comforting, it was a wall. And behind that wall, she could feel his pain so clearly that it became her own. She remembered how everyone else in the room looked at him and saw charm, charisma, and effortless confidence. The cameras captured his smile, magazines later published those photos, and fans all over the world admired the perfection of that moment. But Demet didn't see perfection. She saw a man hiding something, a man who was smiling because he had no other choice. When he smiled at me, she confessed, I felt like he was both close and far away at the same time. His body was standing next to me, but his soul seemed miles apart. That smile was his mask, and I was the only one who could see through it. The truth is, their relationship was never just a simple love story. It was complicated, fragile, and constantly under the weight of expectation. Fans wanted a fairy tale, and for a while, they gave the world exactly that. But behind the scenes, things were different. Love was real, yes, but so were the doubts, the pressures, and the silent battles no one else could see. Demet spoke about another memory that stayed with her for years. One night after a long day on set, they left together. They walked side by side, the city lights reflecting on the pavement, their laughter echoing in the empty streets. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a perfect romantic moment. But Demet remembered how his laughter stopped suddenly, how his smile faded when no one was looking, how his eyes carried a heaviness that words couldn't explain. She wanted to reach out, to ask him what was wrong, to carry some of the weight he was holding, but she didn't. Because sometimes, silence feels safer than breaking a fragile truth. And that was the tragedy. The world adored their connection, but the truth was full of cracks. Every smile on camera covered a silent scream, every glance on screen hid a question they never answered. People thought we were invincible, Demet admitted, but we weren't. We were just two human beings, trying to survive something that was much bigger than us. That single smile became the symbol of everything unsaid between them. It was not a lie, but neither was it the truth. It was Can's way of saying, I'm okay, even though I'm not, and Demet's heart broke because she could hear the message hidden in his silence. For her, that smile was not only painful, it was unforgettable. Years later, when she finally spoke out, fans realized that what they had seen on screen was only part of the story. The rest was hidden behind a smile, buried in the silence between two people who once shared everything, yet somehow lost the words when they needed them the most. For Demet, speaking about that smile was like opening a wound she had carefully kept hidden for years. She admitted that it wasn't easy, because every time she remembered it, the same emotions returned. The confusion, the helplessness, and the bittersweet ache of knowing someone so deeply yet being unable to save them from themselves. She recalled how, after that moment, she started noticing more signs. His laughter was shorter, his eyes more tired, his words sometimes rushed as if he was afraid of saying too much. On set, he was the picture of professionalism, confident, magnetic, always in control. But in private, the cracks showed. He would sometimes look at me as if he wanted to say something, Demet said, but the words never came. And so, he smiled instead. Fans had always wanted to know why the two of them, who seemed destined for each other, had never found a way to stay together. Rumors swirled, jealousy, schedules, pride, outside interference. But Demet's confession hinted at a truth much softer, much sadder. Sometimes love isn't destroyed by anger, but by silence. Sometimes it isn't betrayal that pulls people apart, but the inability to speak the pain out loud. She remembered one night in particular, after a promotional event. The cameras had followed them everywhere, demanding pictures, interviews, and smiles. Kim played his role perfectly, dazzling everyone with his charm. But once the doors closed, once the lights were gone, he sat in the car in complete silence, staring out of the window. Demet sat beside him, her heart aching, waiting for him to say something, anything. Instead, he gave her that same smile, quiet and almost apologetic, before turning his face away. "I knew then," she whispered, "that he was carrying something I would never fully understand. It wasn't that he didn't trust her. It was that he didn't know how to let himself be vulnerable, not even with her." Fame had taught him to hide, to protect himself behind the armor of charm and confidence. And while the world adored that version of him, Demet longed for the man behind the mask. She longed for the truth, even if it was painful. "When you love someone," she said, "you want to share everything, the good, the bad, the ugly. But with him, I only ever got half. He gave me his laughter, his passion, his dreams. But his fears, his pain, those he locked away. And all I got was the smile that tried to cover them." That's why that moment stayed with her. Because it was the closest he ever came to letting her in. It was the unspoken admission of his struggles, the silent confession that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. And yet, even in that moment, he chose the smile instead of the truth. Demet knew fans would see her words as a revelation, maybe even as an explanation for why things between them had ended the way they did. But for her, it wasn't about blame or regret, it was about honesty. She wasn't trying to paint him as weak or broken. On the contrary, she wanted people to understand that behind the strength, there was also fragility. Behind the star, there was a man. And she was one of the few who had seen both sides. In the end, what Demet shared wasn't just a story about a smile. It was about everything that smile represented, the love they once shared, the silence that grew between them, and the pain of seeing someone she cared for suffer without ever being able to reach him. For years, she had carried it quietly, never daring to speak about it, because some memories feel too sacred, too fragile to expose. But when she finally did, her honesty shook everyone who listened. She admitted that even today, when she looks back at photos of that night, she doesn't see the glamour, the lights, or the headlines. She only sees him, the man who smiled to hide his pain, the man who wanted to appear unbreakable even when his heart was heavy. And she sees herself, standing next to him, torn between wanting to believe the smile and knowing deep inside that it was a mask. "That's the thing about love," Demet said softly. "It teaches you to read someone in ways no one else can." To the world, he was strong, perfect, untouchable. To me, he was human. And when he smiled, I could feel his pain as if it were my own. Her words revealed the bittersweet truth that fans had always suspected but never fully understood. Their bond went beyond scripts, beyond performances, beyond rumors. It was real, but it was also fragile. It carried not only passion and joy but also silence, doubt, and unspoken sorrow. That's why it ended, not because the love wasn't there, but because sometimes love isn't enough to bridge the distance between two hearts that are afraid to speak. Still, Demet made it clear that she didn't regret a thing. Every memory, every shared look, every hidden smile, those were treasures she carried with her, even when they brought her pain. People always ask if I would change anything, she confessed. The truth is, no. Because even in the pain, there was beauty. Even in the silence, there was love. And that smile, as much as it hurt, will always remind me that what we had was real. For fans, her confession was both heartbreaking and comforting. Heartbreaking, because it confirmed that the fairy tale wasn't as flawless as it seemed. Comforting, because it proved that the love they witnessed on screen had roots in something genuine. It wasn't just fiction. It was a reflection of two people who, in their own imperfect way, truly cared for one another. Demet's final words lingered like an echo. When he smiled at me, I felt the pain behind it. And maybe that's why I'll never forget him. Because to me, love isn't about pretending to be happy, it's about seeing the truth, even when it hurts. And with that, she gave the world a glimpse into her heart, a glimpse that fans had been waiting for, a glimpse that explained why their story, even years later, still captivates millions. Because sometimes a single smile can tell the whole story. And sometimes, the pain hidden behind it becomes the memory that never fades.